It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the films of February 27, 2004. We're getting to the point now where we're past the dumping weeks of the early parts of the year. This is when the studios usually put out the movies that they're proud of. Whether or not they're good movies is to be determined, and needless to say, this first movie can be very questionable if it's actually good or not, but it was certainly controversial when it came out back in the day. And 20 years later, what's the overall feeling towards this movie? Let's take a look at Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. So yeah, if you don't remember this back in the day, this was a pretty controversial film. Most people really had a mixed opinion on it. It did not get the best reviews in general, but it was a massive hit. People went to go see it, and it was actually the most successful independent movie of all time. It still is that, even after all these years. It's also still the highest-grossing R-rated movie in the USA, with $370 million. You know, it's a film that has been, you know, it was of the zeitgeist at the time, but 20 years later, honestly, a lot of people have really forgotten about it. I mean, it's a movie that you don't really hear talked about all that much, except the fact that Mel Gibson's now doing a sequel to it. It supposedly is coming out next year, but you know, back in the day, it was very controversial. I mean, you either really didn't like this movie, or you really liked it. You either found it a religious and holy experience, or you found it to be anti-Semitic, which for Mel Gibson is not really that shocking nowadays, and you thought the graphic violence was too extreme and emotionally draining to really appreciate the true value of the movie. For me personally, I never really got to see the film in general until very late in the game, and you know, this is after I saw South Park do a true bashing of this, basically calling it just watching a guy getting whipped for 2.5 hours, and basically calling Mel Gibson a wacko director, and just telling him he's cuckoo. And the whole thing in that movie is that you either like the movie or you don't like it, and you're against Christianity. And of course, that's not really what the case for that is. I mean, it's a funny episode, but it's basically saying that you don't have to be anti-Semitic, you don't have to be against Christianity to not like the movie. I mean, and that's really what I came down to when I finally watched the film in general after all these years. I really watched it and was just kind of like, yeah, South Park was making a good point here. There's nothing about this movie that's all that interesting, you know. Like, it is kind of just watching this guy getting beaten, the life beaten out of him for 2.5 hours. I mean, yeah, it's Jesus Christ, but at the same time, it's complicated. I haven't even talked about the plot yet. It depicts the passion of Jesus, largely according to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It also draws on pious accounts such as the Friday of Sorrows, along with other devotional writings such as the reputed visions attributed to Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich. And the film covers the final 12 hours before Jesus Christ's death, known as the Passion. It begins with the agony in the Garden of Olives, continuing with the betrayal of Judas, with the brutal scoring of the pillar, the suffering of Mary as prophesied by Simeon, and the crucifixion and death of Jesus, ending with a brief depiction of his resurrection. And the narrative is interspersed with moments of Jesus' life, such as the Last Supper, the Sermon on the Mount, moments of Jesus' early life, and it was mostly shot in Italy. You know, for Mel Gibson, it was an ambitious film to do, and, you know, this is the guy that did Braveheart about 10 years ago and won Best Picture with it, and maybe he thought this was going to be another one of those movies that would be just like that, and, I mean, I'll give him credit, he did put a lot of visual effort into it. From the visual perspective and the production values are really good. The cast overall is really good. Jim Caviezel, I think, is a very good playing Jesus of Nazareth. I do like the score that John Debney does. John Debney's not a guy that usually is known for doing these serious dramatic scores, but does a pretty good job with this in particular. To me, I think the major complaints everyone has with the film, that's what I kind of have with it too. Like, it does seem like it's too anti-Semitic at times, and also sometimes the violence can be really too much for you. I mean, we can stand violence in movies as long as the film is good. Like 12 Years a Slave and Schindler's List are great movies, but they are so hard to watch because the violence in those movies are just they're tough to watch, but you want to go back, but you still want to watch those movies because the movies themselves were good in general. And there's pieces in here that are good, but there's not enough there for me to say that the movie deserves to be up there with that caliber of quality films like Schindler's List or 12 Years a Slave, because this doesn't really have those same levels that this movie does. I mean, I appreciate what Mel Gibson was trying to do with this, but I feel like it was a movie that had a lot of possibilities to it, but I don't think he really had a direction of who he was aiming this really towards. I mean, it's really hard to make a story like... It's not that hard to... I take that back. It's not that hard to make a story like this and have a wide appeal to it. I mean, we've seen it before back in the days of the golden age of film, you know. The Ten Commandments is one of the great examples, you know. Even for kids, you can make this story work with The Prince of Egypt. That came out not but 6 years before this. But, I mean, it does have its loyal fan base in general, and... I mean, if you take anything else with this is the film that showed Hollywood that, hey, Christianity can sell in film if you have the right people involved in it. Like, the box office will sell for a Christian movie if you get the right people involved in it, you know. A couple years after this, we would have, you know, I mean, Tyler Perry's first movie, Diary of a Mad Black Woman, not really a Christianity feel to it, but it was more centered around the church aspect. You know, that same year we had The Gospel, which was a big hit, and then we started to get these little independent movies becoming successes, like Fireproof, Courageous, there's a lot of other ones, and nowadays we have them all over the place now. Like, you know, Lionsgate makes a ton of these movies every year, and they all somehow are very profitable, very successful. And The Passion of the Christ was, I think, the first one that really showed Hollywood that, hey, these type of films can do really well if you get the right people involved in them. So take that for what you will. You might I have problems with the movie from just the fact that they went too far with it, some of the violence and some of the ways that they went with it. I mean, granted, that's probably what happened back in the day, but at the same time, it really takes me out of the feeling of the film to really give it the proper review that I think I should give it. I mean, it's a movie that it has good elements to it, but it's not enough that makes me want to say that it's one you need to check out. It's really a film that is really just honestly just okay for what it is. I mean, it's nothing too spectacular, and I think the zeitgeist of the time was where the popularity of it was so high, but nowadays it's really not that special, honestly. Like, we see much better movies told with the story told in bigger and better ways besides this. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on The Passion of the Christ. So with that said, let's move on to the next movie, and that is Ashley Judd, Samuel L. Jackson, and Andy Garcia in Philip Kaufman's Twisted. This fall on NBC. I mean, seriously, look at that trailer and tell me that doesn't look like a preview for a show on NBC coming up this fall. You've got Ashley Judd starring in here as an on-the-rise police officer of San Francisco's esteemed police department. After solving a big case about a serial killer, her mentor, John Mills, is proud of Jessica as a father would be of her daughter, since Mills was the partner of Jessica's late father. And with a newly established promotion, Jessica finds that she might once again have to prove herself in a department that takes no prisoners, not to mention a new partner named Mike Del Marco, who might be Jessica's next closest thing to a confidant. However, a man has been found dead, and the two officers are brought in to investigate. What they find is a surprise when the dead in question was a man Jessica slept with, he being part of a list of one-night stands that Jessica has engaged in. Now, under suspicion that a terrible drinking problem gnawing at her, Jessica will have to prove to her superiors and to her skeptical partner that she's not the one behind the murders, and Mills is one of the few people standing behind her. There's also a story. This is a story about a woman trying to find the perpetrators of these horrible crimes before she might end up as one of them. Another one of those movies that really did not know how to cast Ashley Judd. I mean, Kiss the Girls was a success a couple of years. I take that back. She wasn't even in Kiss the Girls, but this was one of those movies that they really did not know what to do with Ashley Judd. I mean, she started her career off so strongly in movies like Cuffs and King of the Hill, and then all of a sudden they just decided to put her in these thrillers that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to put her in because, I mean, yeah, Double Jeopardy was a big success and did well. Okay, she was in Kiss the Girls. I thought that was on Monica Potter, but that's the sequel. Along Came a Spider. But then you have in these other movies that were just movies that really didn't know how to cast her in these films, like Where the Heart Is, Someone Like Her, or High Crimes. But in here, this is a movie that just has no idea what the hell they're trying to accomplish here. I mean, this is a film that just really is all over the place. The twists are not that interesting or exciting. You could pretty much tell right away who the bad guy is and what's going to happen next. And it just doesn't work in the end. Plus, it's a $50 million movie. There's no reason that this movie should have a $50 million budget to it whatsoever. This looks like a movie that should have been made on the cheap, but where the hell did they put $50 million at for this? Like, who on this film is worth $50 million? I mean, keep in mind, this is 2004, and Samuel L. Jackson, he's popular, but he's not $50 million popular in 2004. Just saying, but yeah, the film itself is just lazy too. And it's the last one Phil Kaufman ever directed, which is a shame because here's the director of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Right Stuff, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Henry and June, Rising Sun, Quills, and his career has to come to an end with Twisted, of all things. That's just a shame. Like the whole movie, it's a shame because there's too much talent involved in this, from the director to the cast. It just needs to be so much better than it actually is, honestly. But and again, you could say that for most of the movies that we have on this week's show. But then again, that's Twisted for you. So let's go ahead and move on to. I said this was a sequel. It's not really a sequel. It's one of those movies that I really do feel like was one that they had the name. They had the name Dirty Dancing, and they had a different movie that had nothing to do with Dirty Dancing, and just said, let's put Dirty Dancing on, and then we'll see if it will sell. But it's the sequel, Dirty Dancing, Havana Nights. Sequel, in quotation marks. I said it's the sequel, but no, it's actually a prequel to the original Dirty Dancing, and it serves as the second featured film in the series. And the story takes place in Cuba during the Cuban Revolution, and you follow this young woman named Katie Miller, played by January Jones, and this guy, Javier Suarez, Diego Luna, who are basically the new Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey. In fact, Patrick Swayze actually has a cameo in here as a dance instructor. You also have Celia Ward, John Slattery, pre-Mad Men, Jonathan Jackson, Romola Gary, Mika Burem. Actually, I said January Jones was the woman in this. No, it's Romola Gary from Nicholas Nickleby, and that's her playing the main girl in here. But January Jones is in here. So is Maya. So is I think that's it. I think that's everybody else that's involved in here. This is a movie that's not. I remember seeing this years ago. I don't remember a damn thing about it. But what I remember from it is that this was not a very good film, and I'm willing to believe that this film. I still believe that this film had nothing to do with Dirty Dancing whatsoever, and because there's literally nothing in here that says this is a Dirty Dancing movie. This is a film that's related to Dirty Dancing whatsoever. Like, this feels like a film that they made because Dirty Dancing was that they had a movie called Havana Nights. That's probably what this whole thing was simply beforehand. And they had no other. There was no way they were going to sell this because they didn't have any big stars. However, Dirty Dancing was under Lionsgate's ownership. So they said, let's just plaster it on there, and let's get Patrick Swayze to do a quick cameo in here because that'll clearly put everything together in place, so we can sell this as a Dirty Dancing franchise film. And it just really was not. And let's be honest, this movie became more memorable for what Harvey Weinstein did during the making of this, because this was in the midst of Harvey Weinstein's sexual abuse allegations, and Romola Gary later revealed that Weinstein had required her to meet her alone him alone in a hotel room while he was wearing only a bathrobe to obtain the part, and said that I had to go to his hotel room in the Savoy and he answered the door in his bathrobe. I was only 18, I felt violated by it, and it stayed very clearly in my memory. That's the only memorable thing that this movie has now, is the fact that this was one of those movies where, you know, Harvey Weinstein did what he had to do, did what he thought he had to do back then, but yeah. So that's really the only thing that people will remember this movie from. Is one of the most notorious moments when Harvey Weinstein's sexual misconduct took shape. The film itself is just lazy. It's a lazy film. It's a cheap knockoff of the original film. There's no reason to make this movie. Nothing of value comes from it whatsoever. Just a complete waste of time on all levels. So that's pretty much all I got to say about Havana Nights. But let's go ahead and move on to the last movie here, and that is Broken Lizard's Club Dread. Yeah, those trailers are probably the reason why this film is not as memorable as Super Troopers. This is the follow-up to Super Troopers for Broken Lizard, where you follow a group of staff members on a tropical island resort where an unknown killer begins a murder spree. And it's a film that's essentially a horror comedy spoof with the Broken Lizard people involved. Plus you have Brittany Daniel from White Chicks, Bill Paxton's in here. That's really about it. And like I said, this has no memorability to it whatsoever. This is a film that was clearly made because Super Troopers became the cult hit that it was. This is a film that was trying to be the next Super Troopers and just failed miserably. The jokes weren't funny. The spoof of the horror movie is not really that clever in general. I mean, it's another one of those movies where if you really put it together, you can figure out what's going to happen when it's all said and done. It'd be nice if the jokes were funnier. Like, Super Troopers still has those memorable moments in there that make me laugh every time I see them. But in this, there's hardly anything I remember from this movie that was legitimately funny. And it felt like a film that really just was completely devoid of what made Super Troopers work as well as it does. That's not in this movie. The jokes aren't that funny. The horror spoof aspect doesn't really work all that well. If you're looking for some nudity in there, you'll find it in there. But again, like with Eurotrip last time, just go online and look for the clips right there. I mean, there's no reason to spend your money on this movie whatsoever. Just a complete waste of time on so many levels. And the fact that this thing only had an $8 million budget, it couldn't even make that back. That's how bad this movie is that people didn't go see this, even though Super Troopers had this legacy behind it. Even they knew how bad this movie was, and it just didn't work. It's a really bad film, a very, very disappointing outing from the Broken Lizard guys, who were very funny with Super Troopers, but at least their next film they did would at least be better. And I take that back. That film they did after that film was better than this. But we'll get to that one when we get to 2005. But that's Club Dread for you. And so with that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. We'll head into March next time with two big new releases, including Todd Phillips' latest comedy, the feature film adaptation of the TV series Starsky and Hutch with Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson, and Viggo Mortensen starring in Hidalgo. So we'll take a look at those two movies on the next episode. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and also don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this on this channel. So, with that said, I'm off. I will see you guys next time, and until then, as always, take care.